The grand strategy room of the Krevani Imperial Combine was not designed for comfort. It was designed to intimidate, a cavernous hollow carved from the living obsidian of their homeworld's highest peak, where the air was perpetually thin and the gravity pressed down with the weight of judgment. High Executor Verk stood before the spectral luminescence of the holographic well, his chitinous carapace reflecting the harsh, cold light of the star charts that floated in the center of the chamber like ghost fire. His 4 primary eyes narrowed in a mixture of exhaustion and simmering rage. Around him, the tiered benches of the War Council rose into the shadows, filled with the murmuring shifting of armored bodies, the clacking of mandibles, and the restless energy of a species that had known nothing but conquest for 1,000 rotations, and now found itself staring into the mouth of a stalemate that tasted distinctly like defeat. The war against the Ethelgard Collective had been a grinding, bloody affair, a clash between the rigid, industrialized order of the Krevani and the grotesque, biological expansionism of the Ethelgard. But for the last 3 cycles, the conflict had ceased to matter, rendered insignificant by the arrival of the anomaly that now dominated the center of the display. It hung in the null void between the 2 warring borders, a geometric impossibility of matte black composite and silent machinery, a vessel so colossally vast that it possessed its own gravity well, disrupting the orbital mechanics of the nearby asteroid belts. They called it the Silent Titan, a derelict monument to a civilization dead for eons, a prize that would guarantee total dominion to whichever side could claim it. Yet every attempt to board it, hail it, or scan it had resulted in the absolute erasure of the ships involved, their crews atomized by defense systems that reacted faster than a neuron could fire. Verk watched the simulation of the latest failure play out again. A squadron of Krevani heavy cruisers vaporized into expanding clouds of plasma by a single, unseen pulse from the Titan's hull, and he felt the bitter taste of helplessness rising in his throat, a sensation alien to a high executor. "We are wasting fleets on a ghost," Verk growled, his voice a subsonic rumble that vibrated through the stone floor, causing the lesser strategists in the lower tiers to stiffen in fear. "The Ethelgard are massing on the rim, their bioships growing in the nutrient clouds of the gas giants, preparing for a swarm assault that will overwhelm our blockade. And here we are, throwing our best blood against a wall that does not care if we live or die." He turned his gaze toward the periphery of the room, away from his generals, and toward the small, shadowed alcove reserved for the observers, the minor species that had been absorbed into the Combine or allied through treaties of desperation. There, standing apart from the hulking, armored Krevani and the slender, cybernetic synths, stood the representative of the Terran Union, a creature so soft and unarmored it looked as though the gravity of the room might crush it flat. Ambassador Elias Thorne stood with his hands clasped behind his back, wearing a simple, dark tunic that offered no protection against radiation or kinetic impact, his face pale and composed, his eyes fixed on the hologram of the death ship with an intensity that Verk found unsettling. The humans were a confusing addition to the galactic stage, a species that had arrived not with armadas of dreadnoughts but with exploration vessels and trade hubs, offering medical technologies and logistical algorithms rather than weapons, appearing weak and hesitant in a galaxy forged by fire. They had been granted observer status only because their hyperlane mathematics were useful, but Verk considered them little more than ambitious pets, soft-bodied theorists who broke under the pressure of real war. "The Titan is not a ghost, high executor," the voice of Science Minister Liz cut through the silence, her slender, multi-limbed form stepping out from the data pits, her ocular sensors whirring as she adjusted the display. "It is a machine of infinite complexity, and it is waking up. The energy signatures from the core have increased by an order of magnitude since the humans arrived in the sector, a correlation that my staff finds statistically significant, though we cannot determine the causation." Liz pointed a trembling manipulator at the dark void of the ship on the screen. "It is not reacting to our weapons anymore. It is reacting to presence, and if the Ethelgard reach it first, if their biological interfaces can somehow infect that hull, they will not just win the war, they will rewrite the fundamental laws of dominance in this galaxy." Verk slammed his fist onto the railing, cracking the stone. "The Ethelgard are beasts. They cannot control a machine of that sophistication. They will merely provoke it into estering us all, which is why I am ordering the deployment of the Sunbreaker missiles." A gasp went through the chamber, a ripple of shock that even the disciplined generals could not suppress, for the Sunbreakers were weapons of last resort, planetary crackers outlawed by the ancient treaties, capable of shattering a planet's crust. "If we cannot have it," Verk declared, his mandibles flaring, "then it must be turned to dust before the enemy can infest it." "That would be a mistake." The soft voice of the human drifted across the cavernous room, cutting through the heavy atmosphere not with volume, but with a strange, calm resonance that seemed out of place amidst the growls and mechanical whirs of the alien council. Elias Thorne stepped forward, the spotlight from the ceiling catching the frailness of his form, yet he moved with a fluid, predatory grace that Verk had never noticed before. The High Executor sneered, looking down from his dais. "The primate speaks," Verk mocked, though he did not order the guards to silence him. "You have an opinion on high-yield ordnance, Ambassador. I was under the impression your species preferred writing treaties and cataloging flora." Thorne stopped at the edge of the central well, looking up at the towering projection of the Titan. "I have an opinion on survival, High Executor," Thorne said, his voice remaining level, devoid of the fear that usually saturated the voices of lesser species addressing the Krevani command. "You treat the Titan as a fortress to be besieged or a cache to be looted, but you are misinterpreting the nature of the object. It is not a military asset, and firing upon it with planetary crackers will not destroy it." Thorne paused, looking around the room, meeting the gaze of alien warlords who could snap his spine with a single gesture. "It will merely confirm to the ship's internal logic that you are a pathogen, and it will sterilize this system to ensure the infection does not spread." "You claim to know this how?" Liz asked, her sensors focusing on the human with intense curiosity, for the humans had kept their own counsel regarding the Titan since its discovery. "We have run every scan in the known spectrum. The hull absorbs everything." Thorne tapped the side of his head, a gesture the aliens found obscure. "You are scanning for alloys, for energy outputs, for shield harmonics," the human explained. "You are shouting at it with radar and lasers, expecting it to shout back. But this ship, it doesn't speak the language of war, it speaks the language of burden." He turned to Verk. "The Terran Union requests permission to approach the Titan alone in a single unarmed transport before you launch your missiles. Give us one standard time unit." Verk laughed, a harsh, clattering sound. "You want to fly a shuttle into the teeth of a machine that eats dreadnoughts. You think your diplomacy works on automated death systems?" Thorne did not smile. His face hardened, revealing a glimpse of the steel that lay beneath the soft skin. "We do not intend to negotiate, High Executor. We intend to listen, which is something no one else has tried." Verk considered the request, the absurdity of it warring with his desire to see the humans humiliated or destroyed, and finally he waved a dismissive hand. "Go then," he sneered. "Feed yourself to the furnace. Perhaps your vaporization will provide us with targeting data for the missiles." The transition from the oppressive gloom of the war council to the stark, terrifying clarity of the void was jarring. The Krevani fleet was a constellation of jagged metal, thousands of warships arranged in defensive spheres, their engines burning with blue-white intensity as they held the line against the encroaching darkness. Beyond them, the Ethelgard swarm was a visible stain against the stars, a nebulous cloud of organic ships that looked like flayed muscle and bone, trailing clouds of corrosive spores that ate through shields and hull plating alike. And in the center, dwarfing them all, sat the ship. Up close on the viewscreen of the small, unarmed Terran shuttle, the Titan was a landscape rather than a vessel, a towering cliff face of black geometry that stretched beyond the visual horizon, its surface etched with canyons and trenches deep enough to swallow cities. Captain Alina Vance sat at the helm of the shuttle, her hands moving lightly over the controls, her heartbeat slow and steady despite the proximity to the ultimate destruction. Beside her, Ambassador Thorne watched the telemetry, his face bathed in the pale glow of the screens. "We are crossing the threshold," Vance announced, her voice calm. "Krevani fleet is holding fire, but I'm reading massive energy spikes from the Ethelgard sector. They're launching an assault." Thorne nodded. "They sense the opportunity. They think the Krevani hesitation is weakness." As the Terran shuttle drifted into the Titan's shadow, the universe seemed to hold its BR. Then the Ethelgard struck. From the biological cloud, a tendril of living ships lashed out, thousands of biodrones screaming across the vacuum, driven by a hive-mind hunger to consume the metal of the ancient ship. The Krevani defensive line erupted in return fire, filling the void with lance beams and kinetic slugs, a chaotic storm of destruction that lit up the dark hull of the Titan. "We're caught in the crossfire," Vance said, dodging a piece of debris the size of a building. "Shields are holding, but a stray shot will vaporize us." Thorn ignored the battle raging around them. His attention was fixed on the Titan. "It's waking up," he whispered. On the sensors, the massive, dormant monolith shifted. It did not turn, it simply altered. Sections of the hull that had appeared solid dissolved into clouds of programmable matter, shifting and reforming into shapes that defied Euclidean geometry. A ripple of silver light pulsed from the core of the ship, passing through the Terran shuttle without harm, but when it hit the approaching Ethelgard swarm, the effect was catastrophic. The organic ships did not explode, they unraveled. Their biological bonds severed instantly, turning terrifying warforms into clouds of inert protein and frozen water. The Crevani fleet ceased fire, paralyzed by the display of power. "It neutralized them," Vance said, her eyes wide. "It didn't fire a weapon, it just turned them off." Thorn leaned forward. "It's an immune response," he murmured. "It sees the violence as a disease." The shuttle moved closer, entering a massive hangar bay that had opened in the side of the Titan, a cavern so large it possessed its own weather system, with clouds of coolant mist drifting near the ceiling kilometers above. The shuttle touched down on a platform of smooth, glassy material, and for a moment there was only silence. Then, the Crevani flagship, the Obsidian Crown, broke formation and followed them in, Verk unable to resist the lure of the open door, his greed overcoming his caution. A dozen Ethelgard heavy cruisers, survivors of the initial purge, also breached the perimeter, their fleshy hulls pulsating as they crashed, landed on the far side of the deck, disgorging troops monstrous, chitinous warriors bred for slaughter. "We have company," Vance noted, checking her sidearm. Thorn stood up, adjusting his tunic. "Stay with the ship, Captain. I'm going to meet the landlords." He walked to the airlock, unarmed, as the bay filled with the sounds of alien warfare. The interior of the Titan was a cathedral of silence, the walls towering high into the gloom, lined with pillars of data light that pulsed with a slow, rhythmic beat like a sleeping heart. Verk led his personal guard, elite stormtroopers in power armor, down the ramp of his flagship, his weapon raised, expecting automated defenses. Instead, he found only the human, Thorn, standing in the center of the vast plaza, looking up at a floating sphere of light that hovered above a central pedestal. Across the deck, the Ethelgard forces were charging, a horde of screeching nightmares, but they stopped at the edge of the plaza, held back by an invisible barrier, a wall of force that hummed with a low, menacing frequency. Verk marched up to Thorn, towering over the human. "You have led us into a trap, human," Verk bellowed. "The enemy is here and the machine has locked us in." Thorn didn't look at him, he was staring at the sphere. "It hasn't locked us in, High Executor, it's waiting for us to introduce ourselves." Verk scoffed. "It is a machine, it requires an access code, not a greeting." He motioned to his tech priests. "Hack it, burn through the firewall." As the Crevani technicians moved to attach their interface spikes to the pedestal, the sphere flared red. The entire chamber trembled, and a voice, not a sound, but a direct vibration in the skull, echoed through every mind present. "Unauthorized interface detected. Quarantine protocols engaged." Gravity suddenly increased tenfold around the technicians, pinning them to the floor, crushing their equipment into scrap. Verk staggered, fighting to stay standing. "It is hostile." He roared, raising his weapon to fire at the sphere. "Stop!" Thorn's voice cracked like a whip, surprising Verk into hesitation. The human stepped between the High Executor and the light. "It is not hostile, it is defensive. You are trying to break into a library with a sledgehammer, and you are surprised when the librarian asks you to leave." Thorn turned to the sphere, spreading his hands. "We are not here to conquer," he said, speaking clearly. "We are here to learn. I am Elias Thorn of Earth." "We heard your signal." The sphere's light shifted from angry red to a curious, pulsating blue. The crushing gravity lifted. The voice returned, softer now, introspective. "Earth, we have no record of this designation. Your biology is fragile. Your technology is primitive, yet you do not display the GRESSION patterns of the others." The sphere expanded, projecting a hologram of the galaxy, but it was a galaxy unlike the one they knew. The stars were in different positions, the nebulae shaped differently. It was a map from millions of years ago. "This vessel is the custodian of the last flame. We were left to watch. Why have the children of the stars turned to slaughter?" Verk stared at the hologram, his mind reeling at the implication of the age of the ship. "It is a relic," he whispered, "a leftover from the progenitors." The Ethelgard warlord, a massive creature of fused flesh and bone named Grawl, roared from behind the barrier. "It is a weapon, and we will take it." The Ethelgard threw themselves at the barrier, their acid spitting against the field. Thorn looked at the sphere. "The galaxy is in pain," he said, his tone one of profound sorrow. Different species, different ideologies. We fight because we are afraid. The ones outside, he gestured to the Krevani and Ethelgard fleets battling in the void. They believe survival is a zero-sum game. If you live, I must die. The sphere pulsed. Illogical. Cooperation increases survival probability by 4,000%. Your species, humans, you do not share this fear. Thorn smiled sadly. We know fear better than anyone. We spent our entire history killing each other over dirt and gods, but we learned that the only way to stop the war is not to win it, but to end it. He took a step closer. We don't want to control you. We don't want your weapons. We want you to help us stop the burning. Verk watched the exchange with a mixture of confusion and awe. The human was not pleading, he was communing. There was no subservience in Thorn's posture, only a quiet, unshakable confidence. For the first time, Verk realized that the human's lack of armor was not a sign of weakness, but a sign of specialized evolution. They did not need armor because they disarmed their enemies with words before the first shot was fired. The Ethelgard, however, had no such epiphany. Outside the ship, the Ethelgard Hive Mother had arrived, a dreadnought the size of a small moon, living tissue grafted onto asteroid rock. It latched onto the Titan's hull, boring massive drilling tendrils into the outer casing. The entire station shook violently. Hull breach detected, the AI announced, its voice devoid of panic but heavy with finality. Intruder incursion in SECTORS 4-9. Fatal error, pacifist protocols prevent direct biological eradication of sapience inside the sanctuary. The AI was trapped by its own programming. It could destroy ships, but it could not slaughter living beings that had already boarded its sanctuary zones. Verk leveled his weapon. Then we will do it, he growled. My guard will hold the breach. He looked at Thorn. Ask your machine friend to give us tactical data. If we are to die here, we will die piling their corpses high. No, Thorn said, his eyes scanning the data streams cascading from the pedestal. If we fight them in the halls, we destroy the sanctuary. There is another way. He looked up at the sphere. Custodian, you say you cannot harm sapience inside, but can you control the internal environment? Affirmative. Gravity, atmosphere, spatial dimensions. Thorn nodded, his mind racing, connecting the dots that the rigid Krevani mind could not seeing. Captain Vance, he spoke into his comms. I need you to interface with the ship's navigation, not to move the ship, to move the space inside the ship. Vance's voice came back strained. Ambassador, the geometry in here is nonlinear. If I mess this up, I could turn us all inside out. Thorn's voice was steady. I trust you, do it. He turned to the AI. Transfer environmental control to human interface. We will act as your immune system. The sphere hesitated, spinning rapidly. Unprecedented, transferring control. Now. The world shifted. As the Ethelgard horde smashed through the blast doors, screeching their hunger, the corridor they were running down suddenly stretched. What was 100 meters became 10 kilometers in the blink of an eye. The gravity shifted sideways, sending thousands of warriors tumbling onto what was previously the wall. Thorn stood at the pedestal, his hands moving in the air, manipulating the holographic controls with the fluidity of a conductor. Verk, Thorn said, hold your fire. Watch. The Krevani High Executor watched in disbelief as the humans turned the ship into a labyrinth. Corridors looped back on themselves, trapping Ethelgard squads in infinite circles. Rooms rotated, dumping invaders into stasis holds. The humans were not fighting the enemy, they were sorting them. They were using the ship's internal architecture to separate the combatants, isolating the Ethelgard into containment zones without firing a single shot. It was a display of tactical mastery that relied not on brute force, but on absolute spatial awareness, ND logical dominance. They are containing them, Liz whispered, her sensors recording everything, like samples in a Petri dish. But the Hive Mother outside was not done. Sensing its troops were being neutralized, it began to charge a massive biological energy weapon, a spore cannon capable of rotting the Titan's core. External threat level critical, the AI warned. Shield failure imminent. Verk looked at the tactical map. The Ethelgard dreadnought is too close for your fleet to intercept, and my fleet is pinned down. We are defenseless. Thorn looked at Verk, and for the first time there was a hard, dangerous glint in the human's eye. We are not defenseless, High Executor. You Krevani build ships to fight wars. We humans, we build ships to survive the impossible. He tapped the console. Custodian, does this vessel have a drive core? Affirmative. Dimensional shift drive. Status dormant. Thorn grinned, a terrifying baring of teeth. Wake it up. Link it to the external array. We aren't going to shoot the Hive Mother. We're going to send it a message. What are you doing? Verk demanded as the hum of the Titan grew to a deafening roar, the very atoms of the air vibrating. I'm initiating a localized dimensional shunt, Thorn said, his fingers flying across the controls. The Ethelgard rely on a hive mind connection to coordinate their biotech. It's a quantum entanglement signal. If we sever that, their ships are just meat. Thorn looked at Vance's projection. Captain, tune the drive to the frequency of their synaptic web and push. Vance gritted her teeth. Executing. The Titan didn't move. Instead, it let out a pulse not of energy but of data. It was a scream of pure mathematical chaos, a noise that existed on the psychic plane. The effect on the Ethelgard was instantaneous and horrific. The Hive Mother shrieked, a sound heard across the radio spectrum as its connection to the millions of drones was severed. Without the guiding intelligence, the biological ships went insane. They began to attack each other, consuming their own hulls, spiraling into the void in a frenzy of self-destruction. The massive dreadnought convulsed, its weapons misfiring, blowing itself apart in a cascade of green fire and frozen gore. Silence fell over the system. The Ethelgard fleet was gone, reduced to drifting debris. The Crevani fleet hung in the dark, their weapons powered down, their crews staring in shock at the Titan. Inside the chamber, Verk looked at Thorn with a new emotion, fear. Not the fear of a stronger warrior, but the fear of something he did not understand. You broke their minds, Verk whispered. You turned their own biology against them. Thorn stepped back from the pedestal, the light of the sphere dimming to a restful amber. We ended the threat, Thorn said quietly, without destroying a planet, without sacrificing a fleet. He looked at the alien warlord. This ship, it isn't a weapon, Verk, it's a plowshare, but if you try to use it as a sword, it will break your arm. The aftermath was a political storm that shook the galaxy. The Crevani Empire and the Ethelgard Collective, what was left of it, signed a ceasefire within the cycle, forced to the table by the presence of the Titan, which now sat in orbit around the human colony world of Nova Terra. The humans did not claim ownership of the ship. Instead, they declared it a galactic heritage site, a neutral zone where all species could study the ancient archives. But everyone knew the truth. Only the humans could talk to it. Only the humans could make the walls move and the gravity dance. Verk, now the supreme commander of the Crevani, stood on the observation deck of the Titan, looking out at the stars alongside Ambassador Thorn. The tension between them had shifted into a wary respect. My council believes you are hoarding the technology, Verk said, his voice grumbling like shifting tectonic plates. They say you are building a god weapon to enslave us all. Thorn chuckled, sipping a cup of synthetic tea. Your council projects their own ambitions onto us, Verk. We haven't unlocked the weapon systems. We haven't even looked at them. Verk turned his 4 eyes toward the human. Then what have you been doing in the core for 3 months? The energy output has been constant. Thorn's expression turned serious. He gestured for Verk to follow him. They walked through the shifting corridors deep into the heart of the ship, to a room that Verk had never seen. It was a dark chamber, illuminated only by a massive, complex star map that spanned not just their galaxy, but the empty voids beyond. The custodian didn't wake up because of the war, Thorn said softly. It woke up because it heard something. He pointed to a faint, red, pulsing light at the very edge of the map, far outside the galactic rim. We translated the logs. The progenitors, the ones who built this ship, they didn't die out. They fled. Va. Rek felt a chill skitter under his carapace. Fled? From what? They were gods. Thorn shook his head. No, they were just engineers. They built these ships, and there are more of them, Verk, buried in deep space as lighthouses, warning beacons. Thorn tapped the red light. There is something coming, a swarm that makes the Ethelgard look like microbes, a darkness that consumes entire galaxies. It's been traveling through the void for 1 billion years, and it's almost here. Verk stared at the red light. The petty squabbles of the Crevani and Ethelgard, the border disputes, the resource wars, suddenly they felt microscopic. He looked at the human, this soft, fleshy creature who had walked into a death machine and made friends with it. And this is why you wanted unity, Verk realized. You knew, Thorn nodded. We suspected. The math didn't add up. The Fermi paradox, why is the universe so quiet? It's quiet because everyone who makes noise gets eaten. The Titan is a shield generator, Verk, but it's not big enough for just one species. It's designed to cover us all. Thorn turned to the alien warlord, extending a hand, a human gesture fragile yet firm. The war for the borders is over, Verk. The war for existence is about to begin. The ship is ready. But it needs a crew, not Crevani, not human, not Ethelgard. It needs a crew of sapients. Verk looked at the hand. He thought of the fleets he had commanded, the worlds he had burned, the pride of the Empire. Then he looked at the red light in the dark, the approaching storm that would wash away all histories equally. The High Executor of the Crevani slowly, deliberately, reached out and clasped the human's hand, his chitinous claws enveloping the soft flesh. Then teach us. Verk rumbled, the sound echoing through the ancient, waiting hull. "Teach us how to be the crew." As they stood there, the Titan hummed, a deep, resonant sound that felt less like a machine and more like a heartbeat. The ship was no longer a derelict. It was alive. And for the first time in a million years, it was not alone. The galaxy spun on, oblivious to the silence that had just been broken, but on the bridge of the Titan, the first true alliance of the Milky Way began to chart a course, not for conquest, but for the storm, ready to hold the line against the night. The ship that no one controlled had finally found its masters, and in doing so, it had saved them from themselves. The human looked out into the void, his eyes reflecting the starlight, and smiled. "Let's get to work." The preparations began immediately. There was no fanfare, no public declarations that would cause panic across the myriad worlds of the Combine or the Union. The truth of the Great Silence was a burden shared only by the highest echelons of leadership, a secret that weighed heavy on the souls of those who knew. The Titan became the epicenter of a new industrial revolution. Krevani engineers, with their obsession for structural integrity and redundant systems, worked alongside Terran theoretical physicists who danced with the impossible math of the progenitors. It was a friction-filled union at first. The Krevani despised the human tendency to improvise, to patch solutions rather than rebuild them from scratch, while the humans found the Krevani adherence to protocol maddeningly slow. But the Titan itself acted as the mediator. The AI, now referring to itself as the Warden, seemed to curate the interactions. If a Krevani engineer and a human scientist were arguing over a power coupling, the ship would subtly alter the environmental lighting to a soothing spectrum or project the optimal solution on the wall between them, shaming them into cooperation. It was learning. It was observing the synthesis of two wildly different evolutionary paths and finding that the combination was stronger than the sum of its parts. Months turned into a year. The interim coalition fleet grew. It was no longer a disparate collection of ships but a unified force. Krevani dreadnoughts were refitted with human shield modulation technology, making them nearly impervious to energy weapons. Terran fast-attack frigates were up-armored with Krevani composite plating, allowing them to survive kinetic impacts that would have previously crumpled them like paper. And at the center of it all was the Titan. It had changed physically. The humans and Krevani had unlocked the nano-forge capabilities of the ship. It was growing new sections, massive dry docks that extended from its hull like the branches of a world tree, building ships that were hybrids of both technologies. But the true transformation was in the crew. The Titan was now home to a permanent population of 50,000 scientists, soldiers, diplomats, and their families. It was a city in the void, a melting pot where the cultural barriers were slowly eroding under the pressure of the shared mission. One evening, deep in the Arboretum sector, a massive biodome the humans had insisted on restoring, Verk found Thorn sitting on a bench, watching a Krevani child playing with a human child. The Krevani youngling, a small, multi-limbed creature, was trying to catch a ball thrown by the human boy. They didn't speak the same language, but they were laughing. Verk sat down heavily, the metal of the bench groaning under his weight. "It is strange," Verk said, his voice low. "My grandfather would have burned this entire dome just to prevent that sight." He believed that mixing with soft skins diluted the warrior spirit. Thorn didn't look away from the children. "And what do you believe, Verk?" The High Executor sighed, a sound like steam escaping a vent. "I believe my grandfather was a fool. I watched a human engineer yesterday crawl into a plasma vent that was still hot to fix a regulator that my own team had abandoned. He lost the skin on his hands, but he fixed it. You are not soft. You are merely flexible, like water." "You erode the stone," Thorn smiled. "Water can also freeze and crack the stone, Verk. Never forget that." The alarm klaxons shattered the peace of the garden. It was not the standard drill alarm. It was the frequency Omega alert, the signal that the deep space sensors had detected the threat. Thorn and Verk were moving before the echo died away, running toward the transit pods that would take them to the command spire. The journey was a blur of flashing lights and barked orders. When they burst onto the bridge, the atmosphere was electric with terrified efficiency. The main holographic tank was dominating the room, and on it, the red light was no longer a distant pulse. It was a wave. A wall of darkness was moving through the outer systems of the galactic halo, devouring stars. It wasn't just ships. It was a biological tide, a swarm of entities that fed on stellar energy, extinguishing suns to fuel their migration. "Report," Verk barked, stepping onto his command dais. Liz was at the sensor station, her interface spikes buried deep in the console. Contact confirmed, the outsiders, they have breached the Helios shallows. We are reading millions of contacts. No billions, it is a superorganism. The screen showed the telemetry. A Krevani listening post in that sector had gone silent 3 minutes ago. The last transmission was just a scream of static. The sheer scale of the enemy was paralyzing. The wave was light years wide. Thorne stood by the warden's interface. Custodian analysis. The AI's voice was grim. Species designation, the harvesters. Consumption rate, 100%. Probability of galactic survival without intervention, 0%. We cannot fight that, a Krevani general whispered, dropping his datapad. It is an ocean, we are a bucket. Verk turned on him, snarling. We do not need to drink the ocean, we need to break the wave. He looked at Thorne. The plan? Thorne nodded. The plan. It was a desperate gamble, a strategy conceived by the combined minds of the Coalition and the AI. They could not defeat the Harvesters in a conventional war. The enemy had too much mass. But the Harvesters were drawn to high-energy sources. They were moths to the flame, and the Titan was the brightest flame in the galaxy. Power up the Singularity Core, Thorne ordered. Unmask the ship. Drop all stealth fields. Send a beacon pulse on every frequency they use. We're going to ring the dinner bell. The order was relayed. Deep within the Titan, the inhibitors were removed from the ancient power core. The ship flared with energy, becoming a beacon of psychic and electromagnetic radiance that outshined the local star. It was a lure. The goal was to draw the Harvester swarm away from the populated systems, to pull them into the deep void where the Coalition fleet was waiting. And it worked. On the long-range sensors, the tide shifted. The wave of darkness turned, changing course away from the Krevani homeworlds and toward the Titan. They are coming, Liz said, her voice trembling. Estimated time to contact, 4 hours. The Battle of the Black Reef, as history would name it, was not fought with glory, it was fought with physics. The Titan sat in the center of a nebula surrounded by the Coalition fleet. As the Harvester swarm arrived, blocking out the stars, it looked like a living carpet of chitin and shadow. They rushed the Titan, a tsunami of monsters, but the humans and Krevani were ready. Activate the gravity weave, Verk roared. The Titan's hull groaned as it pushed massive amounts of energy into the surrounding spacetime. The nebula gas was compressed into superdense ribbons, creating corridors of intense gravity. The Harvester swarm, mindless in their hunger, slammed into these gravity walls. Their formations were crushed, millions of bioships compacted into debris in seconds. But there were always more. They climbed over the dead bodies of their kin, pushing forward. Launch the drone swarm, Thorne commanded. From the Titan's hangars, thousands of small, unmanned fighters launched. These weren't shooting lasers. They were carrying payloads of antimatter waste, engineered to destabilize the biological bonds of the Harvesters. The void lit up with blue explosions, carving chunks out of the enemy line. The Coalition fleet engaged, Krevani dreadnoughts forming a shield wall, their human-enhanced shields glowing white-hot as they absorbed the enemy fire, while Terran destroyers darted through the gaps, delivering surgical strikes to the Harvester command nodes. It was a meat grinder. For every Harvester destroyed, 10 more took its place. The Titan's shields were dropping, 70%, 50%, 30%. They are overwhelmed us, Verk yelled over the roar of exploding consoles. A breach had occurred on Deck 12. Krevani Marines were fighting hand-to-hand with boarders. We cannot hold them back. Thorne looked at the data. The lure had worked too well. The entire Harvester migration was descending on them. The Titan would fall and then the galaxy would be eaten. He looked at the Warden's interface. There was one option left. The twist that the progenitors had left in the code, the final failsafe. Verk, Thorne said, his voice strangely calm amidst the chaos. We have to jump. Verk looked at him. Jump, jump where? We cannot outrun them. Thorne shook his head. Not away, we have to jump them. The Titan is a dimensional anchor, Thorne explained rapidly. If we overload the drive core, we can create a rift, a one-way door to the space between galaxies, the void where there is no energy, no stars. If we time it right, we can pull the local space and everything in it through with us. Verk stared at him. You mean banish them and us? Thorne nodded. We take the swarm into the deep dark. They starve to death out there, and we try to find a way back. Verk looked at the screen, at the billions of lives on the planets behind them that would be saved. He looked at his crew, fighting and dying. He looked at the human. It is a suicide mission. Thorne smiled, a grim, determined expression. It's a sacrifice play, that's the human specialty. Verk laughed, a deep, booming sound that defied the death around them. And the Krevani do not let their allies die alone. He slammed his fist onto the comms. All ships tethered to the Titan, initiate magnetic locks. We are taking the enemy for a ride. The Coalition fleet moved in, clamping onto the massive hull of the Titan like barnacles on a whale. The harvesters, sensing the energy buildup, swarmed closer, covering the Titan in a blanket of darkness. "Charge at maximum," Thorn shouted. "Do it now." The warden spoke, its voice echoing with a solemn grandeur. "Protocol Exodus engaged. Goodbye, Galaxy, protect the flame." The Titan erupted, not with fire but with a blinding white silence. The fabric of space tore open, a hole in reality that swallowed the light. The Titan, the Coalition fleet, and the billions of harvesters clinging to them were pulled into the vortex. In an instant, they were gone. The nebula was empty. The stars shone clearly again. The threat was gone, pulled into the abyss by the ship that no one controlled until two species learned to share the wheel. Epilogue: The Long Way Home. The void between galaxies is a place of absolute stillness, a darkness so profound it hurts the eyes. But in that darkness there was a light. The Titan drifted, battered, scarred, but intact. Around it the debris of the harvester swarm floated, frozen and dead, starved of the stellar energy they needed to survive. The Coalition fleet was damaged, but alive. Inside the Titan, the air was thick with the smell of ozone and sweat. Verk and Thorn stood on the observation deck, looking out at the distant, faint smear of light that was their home galaxy, millions of light years away. "We are alive," Verk said, disbelief in his voice. "The enemy is dead." Thorn nodded, leaning on the railing, exhausted. "We're alive, but we're a long way from Kansas, Verk." The Krevani High Executor looked at the human. "Kansas," Thorn waved a hand. "An old expression, it means we have a long walk home." Verk looked at the distant galaxy. It would take generations. Their children's children would be the ones to see the homeworlds again, but they had saved them. The garden was safe. "We have the Titan," Verk said, a newfound strength in his voice. "We have the nanoforge, we have the hydroponics, we have a city." He looked at Thorn. "And we have a crew. We are not Krevani or Terran anymore, Elias. We are the Voyagers." Thorn smiled, watching the repair crews, human and alien, working together on the hull outside, their torches sparkling like new stars in the darkness. "The Voyagers," Thorn tested the name. "I like it." He turned to the AI console. "Warden, plot a course for home, maximum efficiency." "Course plotted," the ship replied, and for the first time its voice sounded almost happy. "Estimated travel time, 400 years, INIT. ATING hypercruise, systems stable, welcome to the new mission." The engines of the Titan flared to life, a brilliant blue streak in the endless night, pushing the vessel forward, carrying the last hope of two civilizations, bound together not by treaties or laws, but by the sheer, stubborn refusal to give up. They had taken over the war, and in doing so they had conquered the impossible. As the ship accelerated, leaving the graveyard of the monsters behind, Verk placed a clawed hand on Thorn's shoulder. "So," the alien warlord said, "tell me more about this Kansas. Is it defensible?" Thorn laughed, the sound ringing clear and bright in the silence. "I'll tell you on the way, Verk. I'll tell you on the way." And together, into the long dark they flew.